Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. This is the political roundtable on islands and their leaders discussing the response to the current pandemic, the response of islands to COVID-19. I am a professor of economics and the president-elect of the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economists. So I come from academia, but I also work very intensively with the United Nations on Sustainable Development Solutions Network, trying to provide sustainability solutions for implementing Agenda 2030 and for making people's life better. So I am also involved in innovation. So I'm really involved at the European Institute of Innovation and Technology under the Climate Kick, trying again to provide sustainability innovation for mobilizing our transition to a greener, resilient, and equitable world. I'm also involved in the funding aspect of this mobilization to the sustainability transition, and I am the board director of the EarthFund. And I'm extremely honored to have today three politicians that come from islands and have done amazing work in their career, trying to support resilient growth, sustainable growth for their people. Nowadays, I start all my speeches by saying that we are at a point in time that we are facing three big tsunamis. Obviously, the first one is COVID-19 and the health effects and the cost on human life. And the second one, which is slightly bigger than the current pandemic, is the resulting recession and the effects it will have on the vulnerable, on businesses, on jobs, on the ability of people to make their living in a respectful way. The third tsunami that has been here for some time, and we've been unfortunately partly ignoring it, and it is much bigger than the other two that I've pre-mentioned, is climate change. The effects of climate change on humanity. Indeed, climate change has the potential to end up killing more people than COVID, and it is there is strong scientific speculation that the emergence of COVID could find its source from extensive deforestation that drives wild animals closer to human populations and increases the likelihood that zoonotic viruses will make the cross-species leap. To discuss all of this, how we are facing the pandemic in islands and how this makes us think about the pathway of the recovery, how it makes us discuss what is the most sustainable and resilient pathway for the recovery of the economy, but also the transformation of the whole social, economic, environmental interaction and system. To discuss all this, we have with us three amazing panelists: Senator Percy Downe, Grace O Sullivan from the European Parliament Green Party, and Gavin St. Pier, an elected deputy in the states of Guernsey. I'm also very interested in islands because I was born in Cyprus, a small island in the Mediterranean, and raised there, and I'm now living in Greece, which has one of the biggest archipelagos in Europe. So let me turn it to our speakers who will take 10 minutes each to share with us their thoughts on this issue. And then please send us questions, send us comments so that we can have a very interactive session. Senator Percy Downe was appointed to the Senate of Canada in 2003. Prince Edward Island. He is currently a zone of the Canadian Senators Group, Vice President of Canada-Europe Parliamentary Association, Chair of the Canada-United Arab Emirates Parliamentary Friendship Group, and one of the 3 vice chairs on the board of the Parliamentary Network on the World Bank and IMF. Senator Percy, Senator Downe, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here today. As you know, the Canadian Federation has 10 provinces and 3 territories. And today I'm speaking from the smallest province, Prince Edward Island. Prior to COVID-19, Prince Edward Island was highly dependent on the Government of Canada for financial transfer payments to fund the provincial budget. In the last fiscal year, over 37% of the provincial budget of Prince Edward Island came from the Government of Canada. In addition to the already established transfer payments, the Government of Canada has been very generous with additional assistance to citizens and businesses across the country to survive the pandemic. As of August 11th of this year, the Government of Canada's assistance to individuals and business affected by the pandemic has been the equivalent of 14% of Canada's GDP. The benefits have included direct payments to individuals and assistance to businesses for wages and rental subsidies. However, like everywhere in the world, COVID-19 has seriously impacted our economy. The pandemic in Canada has raised questions surrounding what we want the new normal to look like. Most of these discussions have been generated from an economic standpoint, including the possibility of a Canadian-wide guaranteed basic income. However, these discussions have also included the ongoing impact of climate change and the need to adjust the economy to adapt and to prepare for new industries. For example, Prince Edward Island has a highly developed tourism industry, and in a province of 150,000 people, we receive over 1.5 million visitors per year, mostly during the summer. But with the absence of those visitors this summer, our cottages, hotels, motels, and restaurant industries, and the workers in those businesses are suffering financially. Given the dramatic drop in tourism this year, some islanders are starting to ask what our tourism business should look like, and do we need to rethink our target audience? And how does this tourism industry impact our lived environment? For instance, in the city I live in, there are water restrictions during the summer season. However, at the same time, people question why water is sold to the many cruise ships who visit the port of Charlottetown. And currently, citizens are even unable to find out how much water is actually sold to these cruise ships, who of course are not here this summer because of the pandemic. Another concern for the island economy is climate change and the rising temperatures causing reduced rainfall in Prince Edward Island that may force the agriculture and agro-food sectors to adjust their crops. The processing of French fries require larger potatoes, and the lack of rain makes it more difficult to grow the proper size. The same is applicable to the fisheries, where new invasive species may be introduced as other local species migrate to colder waters. Prior to the arrival of the coronavirus, Prince Edward Island already had serious environmental problems with erosion of her coastline and challenges regarding public policy discussions on the distribution of her water resources. The University of Prince Edward Island Climate Lab measures coastal erosion using drone surveys and on-the-ground measurements throughout the island. They have found an average of 20 to 40 centimeters of erosion per year, with some locations losing more than a meter. To address these many public policy problems across Canada and in Prince Edward Island, Prime Minister Trudeau has announced in the media that we are weeks away from the unveiling of an ambitious plan to place climate change at the center of Canada's economic recovery. The Prime Minister has stated in the media that in his opinion, the world is moving towards lower carbon and more renewable energy, and that the green recovery is about long-term recovery. The Prime Minister has also stated he wants to use the recovery to reduce barriers to women's participation and Indigenous participation in the workforce. Both are important issues in Prince Edward Island. Some of the speculation in the media is that the new funding will be used for energy refits for building, electrical vehicles, initiatives, and a promotion of clean energy. In other words, a climate-focused economic recovery plan. Questions have been asked how many of these commitments will affect Prince Edward Island. And I have to point out that even though I'm a supporter of the Liberal government, I must admit that we've all heard variations of these themes, but the words have not been followed by any substantial action in the past, but we remain optimistic that now is the time for action. As I indicated earlier, Prince Edward Island has limited financial capacity. Federal programs are traditionally cost shared, and one of the questions we will have going forward is, will we have the financial resources to fully participate, or will we have to select fewer programs and miss the full beneficial impact? That leads to the question about how we can maximize our existing resources to capitalize and grow our economy. The Canadian public is concerned about the lack of jobs and the increasing deficit. How long can public support be maintained if traditional industries are downgraded during the economic shift? Will the new benefits be concentrated in selected regions of Canada? And most important of all, will the government design national programs while giving proper consideration to the unique problems and priorities of each province? The next 2 years will be an opportunity in Prince Edward Island and Canada. Will we just accumulate massive amounts of debt? Or can we use the debt as an investment to springboard our economy to adapt to climate change and grow a prosperous green economy that will preserve and protect Prince Edward Island? Time will tell. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. This was an amazing speech. Indeed, this is the question. Everybody at the moment is accumulating public debt. The challenge is to manage to invest in the real economy in a way, as you said it so nicely, to have a sustainable recovery, because the green recovery is the sustainable recovery. And in order to have that, as you indicated, we need to have climate mainstreaming of our policies. You've listed so many climate effects that are so pervasive in your island, on tourism, on agriculture, on fisheries with regards to invasive species, the erosion of your coastline, the very challenging distribution of water resources. all of these are affected, as you said, are partly caused by climate change, and in general, the non-sustainable interaction between people and nature. And this is what we have to correct in order to recover. And you said something else that is crucially important. It's important to have a green recovery, but also an inclusive recovery. And inclusive means leaving no one behind. The vulnerable, the less rich, the less those who have less access to resources should be supported in that. And I think your speech just put everything together in a way that is indeed the way to go forward. And I would say that the European example, the European Green Deal and the Recovery Fund are good examples of moving towards climate neutrality by creating new jobs, new businesses, and focusing on leaving no one behind. But we can discuss all this after the other speeches. Thank you very much for an amazing first intervention. Now let's move to our second speaker, Grace O'Sullivan, a European Parliament member, Green Party, and of course an Irish politician who has been a member of the European Parliament from Ireland since 2019. She's a member of the Green Party, and previously she served as a senator for the Agriculture Panel in Ireland. Mrs. O'Sullivan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Phoebe. And hello and good morning, good evening, or whatever time it is in your zone, to all the virtual island viewers. It's really a great honor and pleasure for me to be speaking here with you today. And I hope that some of my views will be representative of many Irish, of many Green, and of many European voices. And these voices are the voices who want to protect our communities in these hard times. And so thank you very much for having me. And also thank you to the other panelists. I'm already appreciating the interventions. For those of you who don't know me, I'm from the island of Ireland, and I'm a Green politician elected to the European Parliament last year, representing the beautiful southern area of my country. I'm a trained ecologist and social and environmental activist, and a former member of Greenpeace, where I worked for 19 years and was a member of the Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior when it was very unfortunately and tragically bombed in New Zealand in 1985. I sailed for 10 years around the oceans and seas of the world, and have witnessed many beauties, but also challenges facing many islands all over the world. The Greenpeace campaigns brought me to Antarctica. It brought me zigzagging through the Pacific Islands, to islands like Hawaii, to the Marshall Islands, Kiribati, Vanuatu, New Zealand. And closer to home in Ireland, I spent many years sailing in the Mediterranean Sea, visiting and campaigning on many islands, including Capri, the Balearic Islands, and the lovely island of Cabrera off Mallorca. And I say this to you so that you understand that the connection we have with our marine life and biodiversity as islanders is critically important and has been a driving force throughout my life. Now, the harsh reality is that we are currently experiencing an unprecedented global health crisis around the world, and it is just very, very tragic for so many communities and so many families. But day by day, we're learning we have to adapt to this changing environment. Over the last few months, we have learned to value the importance of digitalization as we see today, and the power of technology in communicating with each other around the world, and how effective this is. We also have experienced the benefits of localization and the importance of our villages, our towns, and our non-capital cities. And citizens have been exploring new ways of balancing their work and their personal lives. I, for one, since the outset of COVID here in Europe in mid-March, I've been working from home, working from my kitchen table, and actually engaging effectively with my colleagues in the European Parliament and with my community through Zoom and different technological means. Normally I'm based in Brussels and in Strasbourg, but for now we're using these digitalizing technology to communicate. But while living in the midst of COVID, it provided us with new positive opportunities, and we need to explore these more and not leave our guard down. Yesterday's challenges have not gone away. If anything, they will only get tougher to deal with. Why? Because of climate change. Why? Because of biodiversity decline. And we see these issues, as well as the current crisis, health crisis we're in, these are at the top of the agenda for the Green Group in the European Parliament. A new phenomena we're experiencing are waves of plastic pollution, the disposal of PPE gear and masks, single-use gear that's ending up in our oceans around our islands. And this is clear that it is a problem for public health, for climate, and for biodiversity. On another front, levels of homelessness are set to increase, and access to housing is still high on the agenda in Ireland. So we need to become smart. We need to become smart islanders, and it is vital that we use smart systems like broadband. We come up with sustainable green jobs, and all within the circular economy. We have a lot to do. The good news for us in Ireland is that the Green Party since June is a member of the government coalition that has produced a really ambitious programme of government for our country, the most ambitious green programme for government that the country has ever seen. And just last week, my colleague, the Minister for Climate and Communications, Eamon Ryan, launched a progressive waste management strategy with very strong targets, which will take a huge amount of single-use plastic waste out of our environment. When I decided to go down the route of and the path of green politics, translating my passion for environment and marine protection into actual legislation was a main driving force for me. I look back to my time in the Senate in Ireland, and I realised soon enough that even when there is a desire for change and knowledge on how things need to change, politics is never easy and legislation takes time. But what activism has taught me is that you must keep going no matter what. And now, as a Green member of the European Parliament, representing Ireland South in the Parliament, I'm representing fishers, I'm representing coastal communities, cities and rural towns, all kinds of communities, and all with an inclusive approach. I'm the coordinator for the Oceans and Fisheries for the Greens in the European Parliament, and I'm very active on the Environment Committee as well. So I see climate and biodiversity as central parts to my work. My goal as an elected representative has always been to translate opportunities into legislation When I say opportunities, I mean investment in renewable energies, to be it solar, tidal, wind, to ensure coastal communities can thrive. Increase business opportunities for the island communities, the fisheries sector, for the sustainable food means, strengthening food security in the EU and at local levels. I truly believe that ambitious ideas like these can be achieved in all sectors of society, from government, citizens, with a shared vision, and we must get on with it. And I'm very clear that it starts at the local level. And that is why I value the importance of constant communication with Green colleagues, activists, members of the community, all of the community, so that we can engage locally, nationally and internationally to share our knowledge and experiences. I also see the young generation as beacons of hope. I think of the young students, sometimes led by themselves, sometimes supported by their teachers, working on green school eco-UNESCO initiatives, which have incredible potential. I genuinely believe that many sustainable jobs in our regions can be created with the goal of looking after our planet and ourselves. Creative thinking with innovation, green ambition is the way of the future. So to conclude, what I hope people watching us today will understand from my intervention is that the COVID public health crisis we are experiencing is a wake-up call. We tell each other that we want to go back to normal, or we hear people say that, but on many levels, we will not and cannot go back to normal. We cannot go back to business as usual, and the quality of life needs to be front and center of government policies and industry action if we are serious on tackling climate change and biodiversity decline. My message is to be open to change, not to fear it. We must work together to build a sustainable, green and social recovery, and to build resilience on all of our islands, and to live, of course, in harmony with nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. If I may, indeed, your speech puts together not just climate change, but also biodiversity conservation, and how important is marine biodiversity and marine natural resources protection for us islanders. Indeed, as you said, we need to become smarter. We need to have smart systems, create sustainable jobs, make the transition to circular economy, and use renewable resources, the fisheries sector, the food sector, sustainable food production, the food security issue, bring them in the center of our endeavor for a sustainable recovery. It is, as you said it, we cannot go back to normal. We need to recover better. We need to recover in a sustainable and resilient way. And I love the way you brought in legislation and people's movement. Legislation is our top-down approach, so every opportunity to introduce new legislation like the climate law, that is the backbone of the European Green Deal, is crucial for incentivizing all the stakeholders, the businesses, the financial sector, the NGOs, the civil society, to start on working on a sustainable job creation recovery. But we also need not just the top-down approach, but as you said, the bottoms-up approach, this climate pact with our people, this commitment with the people, be it the young and the less young, to really understand, embrace, commit to this sustainable recovery. And they will do that if they understand how it works. So it needs a lot of capacity building, because, for example, the jobs that exist now will not, 70% of them or even more will not exist in the future when we are in a very accelerating technological pace that is needed to provide the background for this sustainable and green and digital recovery. So we need to create capacity for people to be able to find jobs in the circular economy sector, in the renewable sector, and in the new job challenges that will arise. So we need the people with us. We need to make them understand what all this is about. We need to train them in order to be able to follow and work in the fourth industrial revolution. And we need to leave no one behind, like you said, be inclusive. It was an amazing speech, and I thank you for that. Our next speaker is Gavin Pier, an elected deputy in the states of Guernsey since 2012, and the Chief Minister of Guernsey. Before he served as the Finance Minister of Guernsey for 4 years. Gavin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. And it's very difficult to follow both Grace and Percy, because I think there's so much in common really with what which we all say. But I think first of all, thank you so much to Island Innovation for inviting me. I am honoured to have the chance to participate today. And I think what's been pulled together is quite remarkable and is a fantastic initiative, and that you've created an important forum. And I certainly commend you for it and wish you every success for the future. And it couldn't be happening, frankly, at a more important time. Clearly, the past 6 months have been unprecedented, and I think it is, of course, a cliche to say that, but it is a fact that governments and public sectors have had to design, establish, and then deliver services that have never been needed before, and to do so at record speed. Of course, pandemic testing capability being the first, track and tracing capability, the administration of business support measures to keep the economy going. And of course, we are still only at the beginning of this story, and there are still many more tests and challenges to come. But I think it is a fact that for all small island jurisdictions, the challenges are greater. Of course, the requirement for resilience is more stark, and we saw that at the beginning with concerns about critical care beds and ventilators at the beginning of the pandemic. And of course, the need for community assurance is more pressing, the impact is more visible, and it's more is seen more quickly in a small community. But I think with that, we also have greater opportunity. And if we get it right, of course, we can, as island jurisdictions, innovate and respond with greater speed, and I think with greater effectiveness than jurisdictions that are 100 or 1,000 times our own size. And I think the opportunity is there to be taken, frankly, to build on the new trust and confidence in government, and to forge a new compact between government and community, and to foster and encourage that collaboration. The opportunity is one that small island jurisdictions can take, I think, with both hands, and certainly from what we've heard through this week at the summit, one which I think clearly jurisdictions are taking with both hands. In Guernsey, we've sort of taken frankly, collectively, as a community, taken a very deep breath. We're clearly, all of us, living through the worst public health threat in over 100 years, and the worst economic shock in decades. We've certainly experienced people with having their pay cut, their summer holiday plans were turned to dust, and families have lost out as a result. The economy here was forecast to contract by an unprecedented, for us, 9%, although I hope actually it'll prove to be a lot less than that. Hundreds of our fellow islanders have lost their jobs, and thousands have only been kept employed at the height of the pandemic with the support of co-payments from government. So frankly, the public finances You mentioned, Phoebe, that I was the finance minister for 4 years. That, well, the public finances have been shredded, revenues are down and expenditure is up. And our reserves, which we've carefully nurtured over 30 years, have really been spent in a matter of weeks to support the economy. And we face the prospect of debt as well. And yet, actually, in Guernsey, and I think elsewhere, there is a new community togetherness that has emerged. I think there's a new sense of community purpose that doesn't really need government to participate in. And if you talk to the community in Guernsey, I think you'll also hear another story, that we've had the most fantastic summer. The sun seems to have been shining the whole time. All the shops and restaurants are open. Many people have enjoyed the unplanned downtime with their families over the past few months, and the peace and quiet that fell on the island during the height of lockdown. And I think people clearly, as you mentioned, have learnt to work from home. I think it was Grace who was talking about the technology, and have exercised more as well, and feel more connected with each other, and certainly more than perhaps for several generations. So I think actually, in short, counterintuitive, people are actually more upbeat and optimistic about the future. And we are enjoying a feel-good factor. As we came out of a lockdown in June, we found that our residential property market and our building sectors were actually booming, which they weren't before. The community, of course, has challenges, and not everyone will have that new optimism, not those that lost their jobs or their businesses, and not those that are waiting now for postponed health treatment, or those that clearly are lonely and have been isolated for months away from family and friends off the island. But as we exited lockdown faster than we could have hoped when we entered it, most islanders recognised that as a community, we've got a whole bunch of new challenges that we didn't have 6 months ago on top of those that we already faced. And yet, actually, by working together as we face COVID-19 through a campaign that we call Guernsey Together, we feel that we have proven that we can solve these problems too. And I hope that those that don't feel optimism do actually at least feel that they have the support of the community. But clearly the focus of this session is very much about what's next. And we've launched our recovery strategy, Revive and Thrive. And the overarching aim of the Revive and Thrive recovery strategy is to make a shift to a well-being economy. And to do this, we recognise we are going to need to invest in our recovery, in our economy, and of course, importantly, in our community. And that focus has come through, I think, all the contributions so far in this session. And working with the community, we will seek, and I think to use what is now a well-used phrase, to build back better, identifying growth opportunities in new sectors, establishing a framework within which we can retain long-term competitiveness, building in an infrastructure framework and focusing on energy resilience in heading towards a carbon neutral world, and supporting, of course, importantly, environmental and social sustainability. There's that word again, sustainability, through economic outcomes. And we feel that we're sort of facing what we would call a roundabout. I'm not sure it's called a roundabout everywhere in the world, but you'll be familiar with the concept of driving up to a point in the road. And we can we've got two exits basically. We can either go straight ahead or back the way we've come as before the pandemic. And I think if we go back down that more familiar road, then we are faced with mediocrity and slow, comfortable, but incremental change. So for us, it's about now powering on down the road ahead with this new community cohesion and confidence, with determination to seize the strategic opportunities presented by the COVID-19 crisis in the transformation of our public services, using the technology that we've referred to in new ways of reclaiming public spaces that people suddenly found that they were enjoying in lockdown. And we need to have big, bold and brave plans now to invest in our infrastructure, both capital, but importantly social, and a resolute commitment to a step change in our climate change and environmental impacts. I think supporting environmental and social sustainability through economic outcomes marks perhaps the most significant step change for Guernsey, because for the first time, having for so long treated these issues, economic, environmental and social, as being sort of separate pigeonholes of work, we are now recognizing that the economy, the environment, and the community are intrinsically intertwined and must be so in both policy and priority terms. So I think this is our opportunity to ensure that we build a well-being economy and do not focus only on economic well-being, recognizing that that is critical. But the connection between nature and our health and well-being, I think, was brought into sharp focus during lockdown, whether it was just the simplicity of listening to the birds in your own garden because you couldn't go any further, or walking along one of our flower-lined cliffs. And I think when you combine that with the recent reports by the World Economic Forum and PwC that calculated the economic cost of biodiversity loss at 7.5% of global GDP, which is a terrifyingly large number to me when I first saw it, and recognizing that 50% of global GDP is moderately or highly dependent upon nature, it's no surprise that biodiversity loss has been cited as the second most impactful after climate change, which is big enough after all, and third most likely risk to the global economy in the next decade. So I think biodiversity, I know, is under threat in many of it's under threat here, but is under threat in many of our island peers as well. And I think if COVID-19 has taught us anything, and I'm sure we'll come back to this in the panel session, it's the recognition that we just simply can't take everyday benefits and services for granted. And I think we've pride in our island's stunning environment and the opportunity to boost tourism and attract new residents to the island. But we rely on the basic services which nature provides, be it whether it's flood and coastal protection, soil fertilization and air and water filtration, pollination and carbon sequestration, all of those things that nature does for us, among many other examples. But these benefits and services are from our natural capital are simply not visible in the balance sheet of our decision making. And I think that is the gap that needs to be filled. We would not overlook the management of infrastructure assets that are valued at 7.5% of GDP or impact potentially 50% of our GDP. We simply wouldn't do that. And yet we by default we do when it comes to the environment. And by not acknowledging the environment in the delivery of a resilient economy for the future, then of course I think we run the risk of falling into the same trap again to a point where our natural assets can only provide these services can no longer, of course, provide the services to the future generation. So for us as a global player, we are tiny, population of 63,000. Our contribution to carbon emissions is negligible. But actually, if we are to play a serious role, leveraging our financial services business, which is the role we can play in the world economy here in the management of global capital, then we need to be consistent and we need to be credible. We need to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And I think what are we learning in Guernsey? That I think the recovery does need to be different, that we need to rethink our approach to economic well-being, that we need to marry that approach to the economy with our natural environment more effectively. We need to work differently with our community. And of course, we've got much to learn from many others, including all of those people participating today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gavin. What you said about needing incremental change is crucial. Indeed, like you said, attempting to face each new crisis with the same thinking that gave rise to the crisis in itself will fail to find a sustainable and resilient socioeconomic and environmental pathway. So indeed, what we need is now a fundamental transformation of our economic, social, financial systems that will trigger exponential change in strengthening social, economic, health, environmental resilience. So we need to think big. I agree with you. We need big changes. We need to innovate our systems. And what you indicated about counting in the value of nature is so crucial, because every economist agrees that we have three basic capitals: the man-made capital, the natural capital, and the human capital, labor. Systematically, for centuries, we've been ignoring the value of natural capital. We've been ignoring the value of its services. We've been ignoring the importance of its resilience and sustainability. And we are paying a big price for this ignorance, because all of our investment allocation decisions are wrong, because they don't take into account, like you said, natural capital. And it is crucial to do that, to take in natural capital and then move to, like you said, Gavin, to a well-being economy, to an economy that is focused not on GDP growth, but growth that includes GDP, but also includes other things that people care about, that people seeing their function of life satisfaction, the security, good environmental quality, good education, a good protection against extreme weather events that are coming from climate change and so on. So I totally agree with you that our aim should be moving towards a well-being economy, an economy that is resilient and it's sustainable and brings together in harmony people, nature, and of course, technology, one of our drivers for a better future. It was an amazing intervention. All three of the interventions were amazing. And now I will turn to some of the very interesting questions that we have from our audience. Here I have a question from Laurie Brinklow. One of the lessons coming out of island responses to COVID has been the importance of developing powers to the local. Islanders know their situation best in terms of limiting access, pressure on healthcare, and food supply chain. How are top-level governments working with provincial and municipal governments to allow this to happen? And once we are past the current COVID crisis, do you think this relationship might continue as we address other challenges, such as effects of climate change? Grace, do you want to address this question?
Yeah, thank you, Phoebe, and thank you, Gavin, as well. I already thanked Percy, but Gavin, that was a really interesting intervention from you. So look, at one point we haven't mentioned, and it probably relates to answering this question, is strong democracy. We need strong democracy. And just to answer the question, that's where we get the top-down, bottom-up impact, so that the decisions that are taken at an international level, say in the European Parliament, that it filters down to the national governments and into the local government to make sure that we build back better, we build resilience, that we recognize that, as the question posed, that we need good food systems, we need good production, we need good we need a good value chain in terms of creating the nurture and the sustainability in terms of food supply. But like I said, sometimes it's very important to recognize that in good democratic systems, then you should have a good flow of the legislation, regulation through the system to make sure that we build back better. We have an opportunity now because of COVID. As I said, it's the big wake-up call, and we have good, strong democracy that's connecting all of the different links internationally, nationally, and locally, because when we talk about climate change and we talk about COVID and we talk about biodiversity decline, we're talking about a global community. So all of our mechanisms have to recognize that it's like the knock-on effect, cause and effect. If we do something good, build back better, and we create synergies around that, that hopefully that'll be like a wave going out from the island of sustainability that will build all the systems back better into the future.
Thank you very much, Grace. I really do agree with what you're saying. And there is a related question from Clint Lewis from Taiwan. He says that from a sustainable islands perspective, what should a sustainable recovery plan entail, taking into consideration the downturn in the economy? So the question basically is, given the huge uncertainty that COVID has created in terms of the economic recession and the huge insecurity that it created for local people in terms of their livelihood, is it reasonable? Is it sensible that climate change is a required mainstreaming for the recovery, or is it a luxury? Senator Downe, do you want to address this question?
Thank you, Chair. It's a very good question. It really was the basis of my speech. It's the ultimate fork in the road. Which direction are you going? The one view is it's a luxury. The second view is it's essential. And the question I tried to raise was, how can we maintain public support? Prime Minister Trudeau indicated what direction Canada is going in. We're going to have what we call a throne speech on September 23rd, which is a broad outline of what the government intends to do. That would then be followed by a federal budget, which will actually show where the money is going to be spent. In other words, what the real priorities are. So if the Prime Minister indications are followed through, then we're going to be looking at rebuilding the new normal with climate change front and center. That will be a direction that Canada will go in. And the question is, how long can we maintain public support? As the person who asked the question indicated, you know, there's insecurities about financial stability for individuals and areas and businesses, and that has to be addressed. There has to be some tangible results to keep stability of society and to keep our people functioning.
Exactly, yes. First of all, we have to make sure that we keep the people at their jobs. We provide support for the vulnerable in the country. We provide support for the SMEs. We provide support for the financial system as non-performing loans will mount. And at the same time, the governments provide financial packages, basically funded from national debt or international organizations that are as big as the loss in the GDP from the pandemic. So all this is a huge, challenge, but like you said, the idea is to provide these packages, but at the same time monitor that the money are going to those that are willing to try to recover in a sustainable and resilient way. And I agree that we should be very careful not to repeat what we did with the great financial crisis in 2008. Back then, most of the resources were channeled to the existing fossil fuel ecosystem, and we didn't manage to recover better. So I agree it is important to have climate mainstream, digital mainstream, create jobs, but at the same time, create green digital jobs, technology-based jobs that will allow this generation and the next generation to live well. And there is a comment from Oliver Cruiser, who says exactly what you, Senator, and Gavin said before. GDP is not enough, and I agree. And this is partly one of the major focuses of my research, building up of sustainability and overall capital. It's important to include not just GDP, but also people's well-being, security, protection, and the value of nature. And I agree, Oliver, and all of our panelists also agree. Gavin, the last question will go to you and comes from the need to identify where all this national debt is going to lead us to. We've proven that we are not good in handling debt crisis. And at the same time, we know that in order to have an economic recovery from the pandemic, we're going to create huge national debt, each and every country. What is a sustainable financial way forward, given your experience as a finance minister? For example, I truly believe that it will be crucial for the public sector to lead the recovery, because given the uncertainty that we have, the private sector will be reluctant to invest. So what we need, I think, is a huge infrastructural investment on green and digital energy networks, e-mobility, and so on, in order to create jobs, in order to increase the security of the economy, and then convince the public sector, the private sector, to come in public-private partnerships. I don't see any other way forward. Here, a panelist says we need to tax the very, very rich. What do you think? What is a way forward towards this big financial issue?
Wow, what a huge question in the last few minutes of the session.
You have 6 minutes and they are all yours. You are
thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll try and draw some of the strands together. I mean, focusing on our position from Guernsey's perspective, it's we're in a slightly fortunate position when it comes to debt, that we have currently we have debt of around about 12% of GDP. So, we would be the envy of most economies in terms of our capacity to take on more, and therefore to be able to address and to be able to invest in exactly the kind of growth in capacity that we need, albeit, as we've said, it needs to be a sustainable capacity rather than just a GDP driven economic growth. Sorry, there's a clock going in the background, forgive me, tells me it's the end of the session. I'll keep going.
We have another 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Another 5 minutes.
Thank you. So I think that's, from our perspective also, as a small island economy, we of course, and this is pertinent I'm sure for many others who are participating today, we don't have the same levers available to us that many larger economies do in terms of the control of our money supply, and the ability, largely we are for example, in international corporate tax policy, we are policy takers rather than policy makers. These decisions are driven by the big economies, the OECD, in driving international corporate tax policy, and we obviously operate within that. So I think that is a limitation on small island states and what we can do. I think just drawing in also, I think it is relevant that the previous contributions from Grace and Percy as well on the questions you posed to them as well. I think, and how islands have responded to COVID and how they're likely to need to respond to climate change. You know, all of these things are interrelated. I think one of the huge surprises for me as the leader of a small government is the complete absence of any global response. It has very much been to each and every individual jurisdiction to decide what is right for them. And I think that, whilst I think the application to the local level, which was inherent in one of the questions, is absolutely right in terms of it being able to get the best response, the fact that there hasn't been a global any global leadership has, I think, hampered and damaged the global response more generally. And I think when you come to climate change, I think the same analogy translates across. We clearly need to have global leadership. We clearly need to have a global response that then translates down into individual actions in every local community that is relevant to them. I think this is that's drifting a little bit away from how we finance this. I think clearly for me at this stage, for our economy, I'm looking at it thinking that this does need to be, some of this is going to need to be debt financed in an era of very low funding costs. But what we need to be doing is making sure that is put into productive, sustainable capacity, and that way we will be able to fund it. If it is squandered, as of course debt has so often been around the world for many decades, then I think we're going to end up with a very difficult situation for the world economy further down the line. Excellent.
Thank you, Gavin. I agree. I was also surprised there was no an explicit solidarity communication between the nations. Indeed, it's like you said it, the pandemic indicated that governments are able to take dramatic measures to mitigate an existential threat. It also shown that people are able to adapt to new restricted lifestyles imposed by this measure, but it also showed the inability of international collaboration even in the face of a universal existential threat like the pandemic. And indeed, we now have documented that not just in climate change, but even in pandemics that have very obvious, explicit adverse effects, national states are better equipped to respond to crises compared to international organizations. And this is a huge limitation because you cannot continue without solidarity. The world is only as resilient as the least resilient country or person. And there is widespread social, economic, and environmental vulnerability that we really need to address. And I want to close this session by saying that maybe this is the moment that we need to get clarity on how to use our resources to become more productive, like you said, Gavin, but productive for the well-being of people, and reboot development towards a people-centric, inclusive, rights-based, participatory, and green development envisioned in the only global agenda that we have, Agenda 2030, and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I want to thank you all. Grace, thank you very much. Percy, Gavin, you've been so not just inspiring contributions, but also very pragmatic. And it is important to have a pragmatic mapping of the current situation in order to have a resilient pathway drawn that is truly not just effective, but possible. We need to make the sustainable recovery possible for this generation and for the next ones and the ones that are gonna come. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you,
Phoebe.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye now.